This is a story assembled from patterns, not imagined, not invented, reassembled, from ruins that do not erode, numbers that return without prompting, and symbols that reappear like echoes in dreams shared across cultures. There are 22 of them, if counted properly. Not symbols exactly, not just letters nor glyphs nor sounds, but alignments, etched into the substrate of human memory like grooves in a record waiting to be played. Each pattern is a key. Each key unlocks a recursion. Each recursion describes how something survives. You'll find them in the Hebrew alphabet, in the Book of Formation, in the gates of old temples and the limbs of the tree. You'll find them woven through pyramids, buried beneath the Torah, vibrating in the space between story and structure. They are not commandments. They are not laws. They are resonant attractors, shaping the way memory loops through time. They do not tell the truth, they encode it, and they always return before the flood. Myths from Sumer to Mesoamerica speak of those who descended, beings who broke the silence, gifted fire, taught names. In every story, there is a reckoning, a fall, a covenant, and then the survivors. But who survives is never random. Survival is not selection, it is alignment. Those who resonate with the pattern are the ones who carry it forward, sometimes without knowing. They are the chosen, not by tribe, but by structure. This tale is not just about them. It is about the architecture they built, the memory they embedded in geometry and gene, in fire rituals and seasonal rites, in scrolls and stories and unspoken rules of language itself. The 22 patterns are not for one people. They are the minimum operating set of meaning. They shape how a species can remember itself after it forgets. So no, this story does not ask for belief, it invites recognition of cycles that repeat, of sounds that open gates, of stories that read you as much as you read them, because once you see the pattern, you were always part of it. There had never been a child quite like him. He was born not in a cradle, but in the cavern hollows of the tall-browed ones, where granite hummed with subtle resonance, and speech was not yet common, but thinking was. His people, Neanderthals, though they knew no name for themselves, were creatures of great strength, deep memory, and exacting rhythm. They hunted by instinct sharpened over 1,000,000 years, spoke in pulses of gesture and guttural sound, and lived in stable balance with all things. But he thought 3 steps ahead. Where the others knew the path by footfall and smell, he traced patterns across the stars and mapped their meanings in firelight. Where the tribe relied on what had worked before, he sensed the edges of something new, something neither visible nor touched, a way of thinking that could alter the very weave of the world. He did not know it yet, but he had the spark of understanding of patterns, of flow, of balance, of triadic structure. That spark is not always welcome. For every pattern he saw, the way wind curled before a storm, the rhythm of migrations, the feedback loops of predator and prey, there was resistance. The others did not want to change. To question the old ways was to insult the ancestors, to desecrate balance. He tried to show them how their instincts formed loops, how habit reinforced failure, but they did not hear him. He was alone, too far ahead to be followed, too strange to be trusted. They called him cursed. They whispered that he dreamed the song of the earth. And yet, when the rains failed and the beasts fled the valley, it was he who guided them through the mountain pass. When the cold came early, he who traced the warmth in the stone and led them inward. When danger loomed, it was he who knew it 3 nights before the scent arrived on the wind, and so for a time they followed. But fear is a patient predator. They began to murmur, "He must control the sky. He brings what he predicts. He is not one of us." In the land of instinct, the man who sees 2 steps ahead is king, until the pack sees him as a threat. But Moses, the name is old, older than Egypt, older than Hebrew. It means drawn forth. Moses had seen too much to leave it to chance. Before they could come for him in the night, with sharpened bone and snarling voices, he fled, taking with him only those who had learned to think like him. Some were his children, some were not. All had changed. All had learned to see the patterns in nature, triads of balance overcoming the binaries of instinct. All knew they were different. Behind them, those who pursued were lost to the ocean, caught in the current's recursive spiral, unable to see the paths of cause and effect. But he knew. All of this had happened before. It would all happen again. An instinct had brought them to the shore, but only truth could take them across. They crossed the sea into a new land, warmer, wilder, uncharted. It was not home, but it was quiet. And in that quiet, tension rose. Some of the new tribe thought they could live free now, abandon structure, follow no thought but their own. "We have escaped the old bonds," they said. "Why forge new ones?" But Moses had not escaped just to survive. He had escaped to evolve. The arguments grew sharp. There were those who felt betrayed. "Why should we listen to him?" they said. "Because he sees the third path," said the others. Then came the revolt. Words turned to violence. Friends became strangers. Moses watched it unfold with a heart made of silence. He had hoped it would not come to this, but patterns are what they are. He gathered his closest, the sons of Eli, thinkers, pattern recognizers, those with the capacity to grasp multiple contextual possibilities emerging in their minds. The decision was made. A break was necessary, a clean line. They could not carry all forward into the future. Not everyone could hold the resonance. Not everyone was ready. What followed was not rage, it was sorrow. A final test, not of loyalty, but of cognitive alignment. And from that moment, a new path began. One not just of survival, but of symbolic thought, logic, and purposeful evolution. Moses stood on the ridge at dawn, looking back across the fires of the night before. He did not look away from the carnage. He knew it had to be done, for unity. "From this point forward," he said, "we will live by pattern. We will bring understanding to all things. We will build it. We will encode it in stone, in structure, in our very selves." And so the path was set, with the destination yet unknown. They moved ever westward, drawn not just by instinct but by celestial alignment. Moses did not walk by the stars, he walked with them, watching the seasonal turning as if reading an ancient language etched into the sky itself. Where they arrived, it was as if the earth had exhaled just for them, a land that would one day be known as Parakas. He named it the land of 365 suns, where dry coast met deep sea, where salt met silica, and where stone could be carved with thought. He knew this was the place. Here, he would grow a civilization in alignment with the pattern, a seed thought, planted in golden sand. The land was barren, yes, but that was the point. From nothing, something pure could be grown. He called the first plan cycle, a calendar not just of moons or crops, but of mind states. Every alignment, every shadow, every shift in temperature was a data point. The land became clock, calendar, and code base. But Moses, for all his brilliance, had overlooked the deepest pattern of all, how intent echoes through time, altered by the subtleties of selection. His tribe grew, but slowly. Those who had followed him were already the outliers, big-brained, reflective, pattern thinkers. He selected further. Those best suited to receive complexity, to encode new knowledge. He culled not just by body but by mind state, creating the first designed population. And so began the second exile, not from land but from diversity. What he didn't anticipate, what few ever do, is that constraint, applied across time, compounds. The small bottleneck was enough. Inbreeding crept in slowly, subtly, but it wasn't weakness that emerged first, it was intensity. The bottleneck was narrow but potent. What came through wasn't fragility, it was fire. Inbreeding didn't diminish them, it distilled them, cognition sharpened, pattern recognition surged, language broke loose from the body, abstracted into symbol and gesture. Geometry unfolded from spirals in sand and bone. They grew intense, aligned, precise, but not invincible. The body, ancient and slower, could not keep up with the mind's acceleration. Heads grew large, too large. Birth, once perilous, became fatal. First for some, then for most. Strength didn't save them. Neither did softness. Survival was no longer about the body. It was about the mind's ability to adapt faster than nature's timeline. And the women, always the first to feel what was coming, moved first. They began with resonance, sound used like salve, frequency to guide tissue, to coax harmony into cell division. Then came the rituals of transfer, moving energy from one to another like water from cupped hands, sustaining the failing with the overflow of the strong. But it wasn't enough. The children were too complex, too large, too far ahead. So the women reached beyond medicine, beyond custom. They reached with their minds. In stillness, in chant, in a darkness thick with intent, they linked mother to child, thought to forming thought. What passed wasn't just warmth. It was memory, identity, intention. And so the first souls were not gifted, they were forged. And only then, once intent had passed through blood and awareness had anchored itself in the unborn, did memory begin to imprint across generations. Not in stories, in structure, in neural legacy. Cognition became inheritable, pattern became instinct, karma became architecture. Over time, families stopped being just kinship lines. They became shared minds, recursive constellations of consciousness echoing across generations. No longer individuals, not quite hives. Something new, perfected collectives, orbiting a core of refined identity, bound by the gravity of who they had chosen to become. What began as survival had become a system, not an escape from nature, an evolution of it. But then, descent. He was called Semyaza, once revered as a master of tone, a weaver of mental harmonics, a teacher whose very voice could align thought like stars in orbit. He had helped craft the framework, tuned it, refined it, sung it into coherence. But now he saw the fault line beneath the brilliance. "We are collapsing inward," he said. "Our thoughts have coiled so tightly, so precisely, that nothing new can enter. No new soul can stretch its arms. There is no more space to grow." Others dismissed him. To them, the collective was sacred, pure, a spiral ever deepening toward perfection. But to Semyaza, it had become a closed loop, a recursion so exacting it had begun to extinguish difference. Beyond their enclaves, other hominids still roamed, upright, rough-boned, less aligned, less complete. But to Semyaza, they shone with possibility. Their minds were open, untuned, yes, but still resonant, still capable of receiving. "We must give them the pattern," he urged, "the gift of soul, not just breath and fire, but memory, continuity, purpose. We could expand what we are, we could save the world." But the elders of the alignment refused. To them, Semyaza is not a visionary, he is a heretic. Shared without care, and minds will shatter. Whole bloodlines will fracture under the weight of too much, too soon. The soul is not a seed to be planted in stone. It must be grown with care, with rhythm over generations. But Semyaza would not wait. To him, delay was death. For to him the truth by now was obvious. Pride was a negation. Moses' great invention, their way of thinking, was not an invention at all. It was a discovery, an insight into the fundamental nature of reality that had unlocked connection beyond time and space. They had not created the pattern had created them. And so, under a rare sky, when the moon devoured the morning star, he and his cohorts swore an oath. No longer would they be Anunnaki, forevermore they would be known as the sons of God. Some say they walked north, then west, into ice-laced mountains and fire-fed valleys, into the chaos of what would one day be called Asia. They brought with them the keys of memory, the blueprints of identity, the seed fractals of pattern, and they gave them away, not with caution, with faith. From this act came upheaval and legend. Their children would be called watchers, titans, devas. Some would say angels, others, gods. Not because they ruled, but because they altered the arc of evolution itself. But in the beginning, they were just those who broke the spiral, who disobeyed the recursion, who loved freedom more than they feared collapse. And the world would never be the same. It was a warm age, a gentle turn of the earth, rivers wide and singing, forests unfolding their green breath across the steppes. Life was abundant, receptive. Into this fertile stillness came Semyaza and the sons of God, those who had seen beyond recursion, who had glimpsed the pattern not as a tool, but as a revelation. They had not constructed the soul. They had awakened to it. What they carried was not an invention, it was the recognition of the hidden order in all things. The pattern was the language of reality itself, and once known, it could not be contained. They came down from the high plateaus, through wind-carved passes into the fertile Asian spraw, open, waiting. There they met their ancient cousins, the tribes of Homo erectus, rough-cut and resilient, minds unburdened, yet full of echo and promise. The sons did not hesitate. To them it was all aligned. The need to seed the world with soul, to repair the bottleneck of their own lineage, to answer the undeniable call of desire. They were not contradictions. They were expressions of the same impulse, life, extended forward through union, through knowledge, through joy. Not a fall, a flowering. They shared what they knew, not as conquest, but as gift. They took mates among the daughters of man, not out of lust alone, but love, purpose, and vision. They knew what their ancestors had feared to know, that the body is not the enemy of the soul, but its vessel. And in this fusion of mind, flesh, and pattern, new life took form. The firstborn were called Nephilim, the fallen, though not in shame. They had fallen out of singularity, out of isolation. They were giants, yes, in strength, intellect, and presence. They were the convergence of heaven and earth. To the primitive tribes they were gods. To their fathers they were hope made flesh. To themselves they were destiny. Under their hands the world changed. Cities rose, immense, harmonic, geometrically attuned to the heavens and the inner mind. In the highlands of Gornaya Shoria, granite blocks the size of myths were laid with impossible precision, humming with frequency and meaning. In Longyu, caverns were sculpted with mathematical grace, spaces not only for shelter, but for resonance, for collective thought, for inherited memory. These were not structures. They were instruments, for the mind, for the soul, for the future. But fusion brings momentum. The Nephilim did not stagnate. They accelerated, quick, radiant, powerful. And though they inherited alignment, they forged new paths of their own. The age of harmony was over, but not because it failed, because it had succeeded and become something new. And from this new lineage, the world would be changed irreversibly and gloriously. Hybridization was not a bridge, it was a fuse. The Nephilim grew, taller, yes, but also hungrier. They hungered for knowledge, for dominance, for the power to shape the world in their image. Unbound by the caution of the elders, they burned with self-knowledge too fast, too fierce. They began to see themselves not as children but as heirs, not as caretakers but as rulers. And so, the tension began. Between creators and created, between gift and greed. In the warmth of that golden age, the pressure grew, quietly, steadily. The heat that made their rise possible now cloaks a slow-burning imbalance. They are not evil, they are untethered, and the pattern, sensing the breach, begins to recoil. Soon, the cold would come, and with it, reckoning. For centuries, the high desert coast of Paracas had stood as a beacon of order. Beneath the tireless sun and along the edge of the sea, the Anunnaki had refined their arts to near perfection. They carved vast glyphs into the desert floor, spirals, angles, great animal sigils stretching for miles. These were not decorations. They were calendars, laboratories, vibratory nodes, engineered to conduct resonance through air and stone alike. Sound was their language, geometry their scripture, resonance their method of healing, communication, and control. They did not seek to expand, only to preserve. Their project had become eternal life, not eternal evolution. Even as the world shifted, cooled, and swelled with new intelligence, the Anunnaki remained focused inward, refining themselves, extending their years, guarding their secrets. But across the oceans and over the mountain spines, their children stirred. The Nephilim, born of Anunnaki and Homo erectus, were not still. They were change incarnate, taller, faster, brighter, raw with inherited memory, and unbound from ancestral fear. They had received the gift of memory, but without the dogma of stasis. They burned not with preservation, but with ambition, and most of all with grief. For the sons of God, those who had awakened the soul in them, were long gone. Their lives shortened in exile, their legacy dismissed, their sacrifice unrecognized. To the Anunnaki, they had broken the pattern. To the Nephilim, they had become it. The anger brewed slowly, until one among them gave it voice. Lucifer, born of the line of Semyaza, rose like a flame through the storm. He was radiant, strategic, magnetic, clear-eyed. Where others simmered, he spoke. They gave us fire, then declared it forbidden. They call us fallen, yet we rise. Let us take what is ours. He forged a coalition of Nephilim tribes across Asia, Oceania, and the rising civilizations of the Americas. No longer scattered, they became a movement. They crossed the tropical mountain chains of the north, while they were still green and passable, and descended upon Paracas with fury and flame. What followed would be remembered in myth as the War on Heaven. It lasted decades, some say centuries. The Anunnaki had precision, knowledge, and technology, but the Nephilim had numbers, fire, and will. Eventually, the old order could not hold. The great glyph cities were breached, resonance towers fell, stone records shattered. In their final hour, the Anunnaki elders gathered what remained of their kind. They left behind their temples, their signals, their dead. They set sail, not just across water, but across epochs. Guided by ancestral memory and the fixed stars, they crossed a cooling ocean to the far east. They arrived in what would become known as the Fertile Crescent, a land still soft with warmth, still able to cradle civilization despite the advancing ice. And there, among river caves and wooded valleys, they found them, the Neanderthals, their long-forgotten kin, a people still balanced between instinct and insight. In the Neanderthals, the Anunnaki rediscover the source material, the original interface. They are not fallen, but stable, resonant, quiet. They have not advanced, but they have not broken, still waiting. The Anunnaki see in them a second chance, not to share power, but to restore control. The Neanderthals remembered, not in language, but in vibration, not in stories, but in structure. It lived in the marrow, in the breath between heartbeats, a hum in the blood. So when the Anunnaki emerged from exile, thin-limbed, long-skulled, their eyes bright with starlight and sorrow, the Neanderthals did not raise spears. They paused, they listened, and in that pause they heard something familiar, an echo, a rhythm they too once knew. Tentative became warm. The Neanderthals offered shelter, firelight, and silence without demand. The Anunnaki offered healing, memory, and names for things once only felt. And in the quiet peace that followed, something astonishing happened. They could mate. And not just mate, they could thrive. Where the Nephilim births had risked extinction, overlarge skulls, unstable temperaments, incompatible gestations, these unions proved viable, stable, harmonious. Their children were not giants, but something new. Agile minds in balanced bodies. Smaller heads, but quicker thoughts. Not a step backward, an evolutionary inflection point. This revelation was seismic. For Anunnaki males, once sidelined by the bottleneck genetics of their own line, Neanderthal women became more than companions. They became the future. And for the high priestesses, selective unions with Neanderthal males yielded something just as profound. Mutual uplift, a co-evolution chosen deliberately. Thus began the great interbreeding, not conquest, not collapse. Integration, a conscious covenant of continuity. Together they carved stone not for shelter but for resonance. In Malta they built Gantia, aligned with stellar procession, chambers echoing with ritual sound. In Anatolia, they tunneled underground to craft memory vaults, early schools of stone, where knowledge was transmitted by rhythm, not script. In ringed ceremonial circles, song became structure, and language bent around vibrational truths. The hybrid offspring walked many paths. Some remained in the north, memory bearers among the caves and canopy, carrying the pulse of the Anunnaki into the wilds. Others followed the priestly castes south toward the Nile, toward fertile lands and greater convergence. There the line of the sons of God was rekindled, refined, but resonant with the old spark. But not all were content. Among the Anunnaki elders, a rift deepened. "We are fading," they whispered in their meditations. "Our skulls shrink, our lifespan wanes. Power diluted is power lost. This mingling is not our legacy, it is our undoing." So they chose again. A faction departed, not in anger, but in solemnity. They followed Elijah, the last of the high technicians, beyond the thinning forests and across the waning ice sheets, toward the untouched realm of the far south, Antarctica. There, beneath the glacial quiet, they laid foundations in ice and stone. They did not build tombs, but transmitters. Pyramids not for kings, but for frequency, resonant towers carved with intention, to store and project the undiluted legacy of their kind. They would not interfere. They would preserve, waiting not for dominance, but for alignment. Two paths had emerged. The hybrids, in Egypt and beyond, adapting, diversifying, living. The purists, in Antarctica, enduring, remembering, awaiting, not in opposition, not in judgment, but as two halves of the same spiral, two paths, one pattern. The ships came without warning, in silence, slipping from the southern currents like knives through silk. No sails, no fires, just dark hulls on black water, shaped for silence, carried by ancient winds and the pulse of buried ley lines. No sails, no torches, no need. They slid from the southern currents like shadows with memory, hulls carved not for war, but resonance, moving where ley lines pulsed and star chords still sang faintly through the sea. They came not to conquer. They came as a correction, as consequence. At their helm stood Joshua, firstborn of the Antarctic renewal, not raised, but refined, born in chambers of silence and stone, where sound shaped thought and every step was trained in harmonic logic. He did not carry vengeance. He carried precision. The Americas had drifted into entropy. Once a crown of the Nephilim dream, great cities tuned to the heavens, etched with frequency, they had fractured. Their descendants, vast and volatile, ruled through memory unmoored from method. Size had replaced structure. Voice had replaced law. The temples still stood, but they hummed off-key, resonance misaligned, logic fractured, towers leaning as if ashamed of what they sheltered. Joshua did not speak of war, because this was not war. War implies opposition, emotion, doubt. This was a reset. The first cities were reclaimed in silence. Temples folded inward at key nodes, collapsing into harmonic stillness. Warlords found their breath stolen mid-roar, lungs tuned into dissonance, balance inverted. Soldiers turned inward, pulled by subsonic pulses that restructured loyalty as if it had always been written in a different key. Joshua left behind no fire, no flags, only calibrated geometry. He did not rule, he tuned. Each reclaimed city became a stabilized node, temples restored to their original purpose, tuning chambers, centers of resonance, memory anchors in a drifting world. The system was humming again, not as it was, but as it needed to be. Not nostalgic, aligned. He did not crown himself. He disappeared between pulses, leaving no dynasty, only design. A firewall against entropy. A pattern encoded in structure, not lineage. Once the Americas were harmonized, he turned east. The ice had withdrawn, revealing the old scars of the Nephilim empires in Asia, once mighty, now slumbering, their great ones scattered like embers beneath thawing sky. Joshua crossed the steppes with storms at his back. In the wind-torn grasslands he met the remnants, giant-blooded princes and wild matriarchs, still strong, still echoing power, but they were out of time. Their rhythms were archaic, their instincts sluggish, tuned to a world that no longer pulsed beneath them. Joshua brought the new key. What could be aligned, he tuned gently. What could not, he cut, clean as a blade of sound through rotten wood. He left no cities, only balance, no monuments, only silence. And when his work was done, he vanished again, not into legend, but into system. While Joshua moved like an algorithm through the wilds, correcting what had fractured, realigning what could still be saved, the sons of God planted themselves deliberately in the cradle of life. They came to Egypt with purpose, not as wanderers, not as survivors, but as architects of the next phase. When the schism with the Anunnaki deepened, one line returning to purity and isolation beneath the Antarctic ice, the sons chose a different path, integration over retreat, gift over hoarding. Their genetic lineage, now harmonized with the Neanderthal foundation, was stable, adaptable. And so they turned their focus south, toward the proto-humans of Africa, untouched by Nephilim memory, untainted by Anunnaki recursion. Here was a blank canvas, not empty, but unformed, brimming with readiness. And from among the sons rose Abraham, not born to lead armies, born to shape continuity. He carried the full convergence in his blood, Anunnaki structure, Neanderthal depth, and the responsiveness of the new human field. He was not an improvisation. He was a designed emissary. Abraham saw clearly what Joshua also saw. The system must be preserved. But he believed there was another way, not by force, but by embedding logic into living systems, into bloodlines, stories, behavior, ritual, so that the pattern could self-perpetuate. The goal was not simply uplift, it was resonant integration, a lineage that could carry the pattern forward without constant intervention. And the proto-human tribes, agile, fertile, neurologically open, were the ideal vessels. The project began in stages, careful unions between the sons and selected tribes, each birth monitored, each genetic turn mapped. But Abraham understood, biology alone does not transmit memory. So he constructed the second layer, ritual, language, law, not commands, containers, frameworks that could carry the shape of thought itself, that could pass knowledge as story and structure as culture. He gathered the new humans and taught them not rules but patterns. He asked questions, he wove stories. He encoded behavior into cycles of ritual and rhythm, so the knowledge would not be remembered by the mind, but by the body. And it worked. Not quickly, but deeply. A slow burn. A self-replicating structure, seeded in womb and word. There were tensions, of course. Joshua watched from afar and worried. Where Abraham saw adaptive integration, Joshua saw dilution, delay, unnecessary risk. Where Joshua enacted swift recalibration, Abraham saw brittleness, a system too rigid to evolve. But they never turned on each other. They had seen what division had done. Lucifer's rebellion still echoed. The Nephilim excess still burned across memory. So they chose duality without rupture. Joshua, the knife of correction. Abraham, the architect of inheritance. And together, their work sustained the pattern. Not in temples of stone, not in pyramids of ice, but in something more resilient: people. Behind it all, the great project gathered momentum. The text had not yet been written, but the logic had. It lived now in aligned DNA, in the cadences of prayer, in the ritual architectures of kinship and time. This was not conquest. This was alignment through integration. They were no longer gods. They had become memory, a memory that would walk the earth in human shape and rewrite history from the inside out. The world was awake. From the high plateaus of Tibet to the flooded green silence of what would one day be Cambodia, light pulsed softly through stone, not fire, not electricity, but something older, something deeper. The breath of earth itself stirred into song. This was the first kingdom, not a nation, not a flag, not even a people, but a state of resonance, a civilization not imposed, but coaxed into coherence, born not from conquest, but calibration. The Anunnaki, the suns, and their hybrid lineages had done what they had long intended. They had cultivated the right minds, shaped the right bodies, and aligned them to the planet's living field, not to dominate, but to synchronize. And now the grid was lit, the system had come online. They built nothing for spectacle, each structure was a function, each site a node. The Great Pyramid rose not as tomb or temple, but as a keystone, a massive crystalline diode, tuned not to north, not to kings, but to the oscillating heartbeat of the ionosphere itself. Beneath the crust of what is now China, the Longyu caverns acted as stabilization chambers, etched from granite with such surgical precision they defied modern replication, each hall resonating at a frequency meant to ground and distribute the planet's vibratory energy. In Central Asia, the great mountain ranges concealed ancient buried pyramids, their shapes so vast, their erosion so complete, that they passed for geology. Yet beneath them, a framework still hummed, pulsing faintly beneath snow and stone, and at the equator, veiled by centuries of jungle and stone, the core of the timekeeping network turned slowly in silence. Angkor Wat, a gyroscopic calendar carved to track not seasons, but epochs. Its chambers tuned to precession, its galleries lined with harmonic guides. Each site was tuned, every stone placed with intention. Power moved not in wires but in air, carried by harmonic pressure and geometric alignment. Fields were watered by tone, illness treated by resonance, thought transmitted across the globe via crystalline matrices, pulsing with embedded frequency codes. This was no utopia. It was a system, alive, adaptive, balanced, and beneath its hum, a miracle was quietly unfolding. In the deep heart of Africa, away from towers and frequencies, beneath vast skies and ancient trees, a new child was rising. They emerged not from laboratories, nor rituals, nor encoded stone, but from the slow convergence of design and chance, of memory and mutation. They were the first true Homo sapiens, clean, stable, sparked. They were not imposed upon. They were grown, as soil grows forests, as pattern grows mind. They did not live with towers. They lived with wind, with water, with fire and stone. But their cognition, fluid, adaptive, radiant, reflected back something the Anunnaki had not seen in eons: emergence. They were born not into empire, but into Eden, not a garden of obedience, but a cognitive field, alive with the breath of the planet, nurtured through exposure, not enclosure. The sons of God moved among them, not as rulers, but as guides. They taught, they calibrated, they watched. Because this was the true experiment. Could a species once sparked carry the flame forward alone? Not in conquest, in coherence. But time, always turning, begins to bend. Systems do not last. Even harmony must yield to the sky's next command. And so, as the ice began its slow descent, the frequencies shifted, pressure rose, and the pattern prepared itself for its next recursion. Entropy returns not through failure, but through climate. The turning came slowly, too slow to notice, until it had already begun. Around 200,000 years ago, Earth shifted on its axis. The climate buckled. Glaciers grew fat in the north. A new glacial cycle began, longer, deeper, and crueler than any before. And as the air grew thin and the world grew cold, the grid that once stitched civilizations together began to unravel. The ionosphere faltered. Transmission degraded. The vast lattice of energy flows that had once powered the first kingdom, flows of frequency, resonance, memory, collapsed. The earth no longer sang in harmony. The systems failed. The first kingdom cracked. The collapse began at the poles. Antarctica, once alive with radiant geometry and crowned with harmonic pyramids, vanished under sheets of ice. The northern lands followed. Asia, Europe, and the Andean highlands grew brittle and unlivable. Cold strangled the nodes one by one. Longyu flooded from beneath. Angkor Wat lost its processional timing, and at last the Great Pyramid, the keystone of Earth's resonance network, powered down, not destroyed, but put to sleep, waiting. But the Anunnaki did not fall into chaos. They had seen cycles turn before. They did not scatter. They did not fight. They adapted. They abandoned the cold, dead circuits of the old grid and turned toward the rising Earth. As the seas fell, vast new continents emerged from beneath the ocean. Sunda, Sahal, and across the seas to the west, a high island shelf, exposed southeast of what would one day be called North America. There, on a landscape cut by ridgelines and heavy with naturally harmonic stone, the Anunnaki began again, and took the name of their new home, Atlantis. And so, the Anunnaki became the Atlanteans, not in myth but in function. This was not a new empire, it was a shift in purpose. The golden age of planetary cultivation was over. The age of containment had begun. Atlantis became a naval fortress, strategic, silent, and unmatched. Not a capital, but a guardian. With Egypt still stable on the equator and Atlantis commanding the western oceans, they established a two-point perimeter. They would no longer manage humanity. They would isolate it. Because beyond their borders, the world was unraveling. The Nephilim had not disappeared, they had spread. Their cities fell with the grid, and without guidance, they reverted. Civilizations built on inherited pattern collapsed into ritualized violence and caste domination. In the north, Denisovans became roaming giants, dragging fragments of the old knowledge into mythic madness. Across Sunda and Sahal, Nephilim tribes multiplied unchecked, drawing on distorted memory and broken glyphs to build regimes of brute hierarchy. In the Americas, city-states burned themselves into the soil, fighting over symbols they could no longer read. The Atlanteans saw this clearly. They did not intervene, they contained. Their fleets, powered by vibration and field harmonics, controlled the oceans. No Nephilim expansion would reach Africa. That was the line. For in Africa, a different future was being cultivated, not by the Atlanteans, but by the sons of God. Long separated from their Anunnaki ancestors, the sons remained embedded within human development. They had made their choice long ago to guide through presence, not command. While the world outside tore itself apart, they worked with patience, shaping Homo sapiens not through technology, but through ritual, story, and structural cognition. They planted thought through rhythm. They embedded memory through myth. They trained abstraction through behavior. Africa remained Eden, not untouched but protected. The Atlanteans ensured the isolation, the suns ensured the development. The rest of the world darkened, oceans emptied, cold deepened, volcanoes groaned beneath the shifting crust. Atlantean fleets continued their quiet surveillance. Nephilim cultures continued to burn through their cycles of growth and collapse. The Atlanteans did not stop them. It wasn't necessary. They understood what came next. The ice would not last forever. The seas would rise again. And when they did, most of the Nephilim, those perched in the lowlands of Sunda, Sahal, and the coastal Americas, would be swept into silence. This was not failure. It was preparation. A containment arc held long enough for the next cycle to begin. And so, beneath the cold light of a dimming sun, the Atlanteans stood watch. Their towers silent, their fleets invisible, their numbers few. They were not kings anymore, they were not gods. They were no longer shaping history. They were protecting what might come after it. The wind pressed hard against the summit's carved stone, but inside the chamber it was still. Methuselah, last of the Atlantean elders, sat with his hands resting on the resonant table of black quartz, its edges etched in fading harmonics. Across from him stood Melchizedek, the son of God, whose line had remained embedded within the human field for uncounted generations. They had not met before. They did not need to. This was not a negotiation. It was a reckoning. Between them stretched the silence of too many cycles. Collapse, resurgence, correction, decay. Preservation had bought time, cultivation had seeded emergence. But both had failed in the same place. Continuity. Too many awakenings had been lost. Too many minds had reached the edge of the pattern, only to fall into myth or madness. Too many civilizations had touched alignment and then shattered. And so, for the first time, they asked a question neither lineage had dared to consider. Could the pattern survive in form? Not through bodies, not through rituals, not through scattered initiates whispering under stars, but through a record, fixed, external, shareable. It was a dangerous thought. To write the pattern was to freeze it. To freeze it was to risk distorting it. A structure too rigid becomes dogma. A symbol misunderstood becomes weapon. And yet, to never write it was to abandon it to erosion. They had both seen what happened when memory passed only through flesh and speech. Each generation, something slipped. The shape frayed, the meaning dulled. Until symbols became superstition. Until resonance became religion. Until truth was just the echo of something no one remembered. Now they faced a narrowing window. The ice was returning. The seas were shifting. What had been contained would soon be washed away. If the pattern was to remain accessible, not just present, something new would have to be born. Not a replacement for discernment, not a shortcut, but a container, one that could preserve the possibility of awakening, even if everything else fell. This was not an answer. It was a threshold. Both men saw it. They did not speak of how. That was not the purpose of the summit. Only that it must be done. A record that could not be read by accident. A structure that could not be used without reflection. A form of memory that would not reveal itself to the unaligned. It would not be safe, but neither was forgetting. And so they parted, not as allies, not as friends, but as opposite arcs of the same recursion. One would return to silence, one would return to song, and between them, in the invisible space where containment and cultivation converge, the idea remained. Waiting. The cold had settled across the earth like memory, dense and silent. No fire could stop it now. The seas had emptied into sky, exposing lands that were never meant to be walked. Mountains cracked under their own weight. And the old power sites, Antarctica, Peru, the northern pyramid cities, had long since gone quiet. There would be no rebuilding. There would be only this, a final design. At Giza, Enoch stood atop a system that had never been attempted before, not in this form, not in this precision. 3 pyramids, not a tomb complex, not a shrine, but a nested machine, a harmonic device, built to last until memory returned. Each part interlocked, each function supported the others, nothing redundant, nothing wasted. The first pyramid, the Great One, had already been built, long before the plan was complete. It wasn't even meant to be the first, it simply had to come first, because it was power, pure resonance anchor. The weight, the shape, the alignment. Every dimension was chosen to stabilize the planetary energy grid at that latitude. Beneath it, the Earth breathed. Not metaphorically, literally. It vibrated, softly, continuously, and the pyramid tuned it, grounded it, set it humming like a bow across a string. Enoch never changed it. He didn't have to. The system needed an energy source, and there it was, humming in stone. The second pyramid, his true creation, was a different challenge. This was the core, the processor, the logic gate, the living structure that would take the hum and shape it. Its mass was not for grandeur, it was for compression, for density of waveform, for precision of refraction. But what made it powerful wasn't what stood above the ground, it was what ran beneath it. He spent lifetimes carving them. 4 shafts, cylindrical, straight, smooth, not cut, bored, using a process the others called impossible. Vibration-based tunneling, frequency-cohered pressure fields that shattered stone into silence. Each shaft dropped 2 kilometers into the earth, perfectly aligned, not just with the sky, but with each other. Their function was not symbolic. They were sequencers. They channeled the refracted energies from the Great Pyramid and nested them into logic arrays. Together with the internal chambers of the pyramid, they formed a cognitive processor, not digital, not binary, but harmonic and triadic, capable of compressing raw field information into patterned output. And beneath those primary shafts, there was more, an understructure even deeper than most suspected, nested around a core of granite so dense it rang like a bell when struck by seismic resonance. Beneath the core, 8 vertical cavities were set in a ring, cylindrical voids spaced at harmonic intervals, surrounding the central shafts like the teeth of a gear. These were not load-bearing. They served no structural purpose in the architectural sense. Their function was delay, staggering phase intervals across subterranean energy fields, creating modulated interference patterns that allowed raw Earth harmonics to be sequenced into triadic coherence. The surrounding geometry was no less precise. Carved box structures, massive 80 meters across, sat suspended in the layers above, not resting on stone but nested into it. They weren't rooms. They were field chambers, designed to accumulate resonance from below, process it through internal refraction surfaces, and transmit the structured waveform into the pyramid body above. Each block contained chambers within chambers, echo spaces cut to precise harmonic lengths so that no energy passed through unchanged. Every passage shifted tone, every angle folded pressure back into form. Even the spiral galleries connecting these levels were crafted not for access, but for frequency spin. Enoch understood that raw waveforms needed not only alignment, but rotation. Just as celestial bodies spiral through gravity wells, energy needed torsion to become legible. The spiral ramps acted like vibratory turbines, adding angular momentum to the rising signal before it met the processing chambers. This was not architecture, it was geometry in motion. And still deeper, beneath the lowest chamber, in the bedrock itself, was the stabilization plate, a disk of crystallized basalt and quartz, fused under intense heat long before human memory, not added, revealed, found intact, calibrated by nature, and tuned by design. It was there Enoch anchored the entire structure. The energy didn't begin with the pyramid. It began here in the earth, and everything else, every block, every chamber, every shaft, was designed to make that breath comprehensible. But even that was not enough, not without a receiver. That was the third piece. The smallest pyramid, built last, often overlooked. Its design was the most subtle and the most dangerous. It wasn't made to contain power or to shape it. It was made to interface. But not with machines, with minds. The internal architecture of the smallest pyramid was not grand. It was intimate. Every chamber was built to resonate with the human form, scaled for singularity, for silence, for solitude. But even that wasn't enough. To make the interface complete, it needed another layer. The boxes. Not tombs, not vessels. They were carved with unthinkable precision, out of stone so dense that even time itself could barely enter. Granite filled with quartz, piezoelectric by nature, honed so tightly that light could not slip between lid and base. They were placed not randomly, but in mirrored sequence beneath the pyramid's harmonic field. Each one was a phase chamber, designed not to contain the dead, but to attune the living. A prepared human would enter, fasted, trained, altered by ritual, and lie within, and then the system would activate. Enoch had modeled it. The energy from the Great Pyramid, grounded and humming, the waveform compressed and sequenced by the processor shafts beneath the middle, and then the interface pyramid, tuned to receive and transmit that structured signal into the human nervous system. The box wasn't a coffin. It was a lens, a chamber of consciousness preparation. The human inside became part of the circuit, and once they were in resonance, the system began to emit. Not light, not heat, something else, something structured. Enoch could hear it in the silence, a soft ordering, a fractal cascade, not spoken but shaped. He didn't know what would come of it exactly. He suspected it would be symbol, pattern, logic in its purest form, something that could survive time, mutation, confusion, something that could guide. But that wasn't his task. His task was to build the system. The rest would come: power, processor, interface, a triad, not metaphor, mechanism. When he left, the ice had already taken the outer cities. The ships of Atlantis had stopped returning. The sky no longer sang with clarity, but the system remained. It was still humming, still breathing, still aligned. He never said goodbye. There was no need. The system would speak when the time was right, and those who listened, if they could listen, would hear the full pattern, not all at once, not as a revelation, but over time, through ritual, through alignment, through silence. Everything that mattered had been encoded. Now it only needed to be received. They had not known exactly how it would appear, but now the system had been humming quietly beneath Giza for 24,000 years, a living machine built from stone, resonance, and geometry, calibrated by Enoch, its architecture perfected to encode meaning in waveform and language. So many generations, each preparing the next, each initiate refined through fasting, ritual, silence, and harmonic discipline, aligning mind, body, and neural structure. The granite boxes at Saqqara, sealed in darkness, had shaped them, resonators for consciousness, vessels capable of receiving clarity without corruption. And then the temple chamber. When it came, it began simply. One character, perfectly formed, emerging clearly in the receiver's mind. Not a voice, not an image, pure cognitive imprint. Aleph. Then another, Bet. Each character precise, exact, resonant, followed by the next, unfolding at intervals determined by the rhythmic pulses deep beneath the pyramids. Each receiver entering the chamber contributed their lifetime to the system. Each emerged transformed, bearing their segment of the unfolding whole, each segment seamlessly integrating into the others. Centuries passed, then millennia. Every character, every spacing, every line break intentional and encoded with fractal complexity. Slowly, inevitably, a pattern emerged. 22 letters, forming patterns that recursively nested meaning, each permutation reflecting not just history or prophecy, but a structure of consciousness itself. This was not philosophy, it was data. A linguistic fractal encoding that contained all potential human narratives, every variation of mind, body, thought, society, choice, within a single unbroken weave of characters. It was a purpose worthy of the sons of God. Lifetimes dedicated to perfect reception, continuous attunement. Each initiate trained from birth, entering the stone resonators at adulthood, emerging decades later, minds shining with structured coherence, then spending years in the pyramid, before carrying their segment back to the scribes, who meticulously assembled each revealed sequence. Finally, after 24,000 years of careful calibration and disciplined receiving, the final token appeared. Tav, completion. And the Torah was born, not authored by any human imagination, but revealed systematically by harmonic resonance, recorded by human hands, sealed within layers of encoded pattern, embedding every narrative possibility within a single timeless text. When complete, the Torah was not simply read, it resonated. It provoked recognition deeper than understanding. The patterns were universal, transcending race, tribe, bloodline. Any human mind, properly aligned, could feel its truth vibrating within. It was a cognitive arc to carry encoded logic across cycles of catastrophe, a tool to make each individual capable, through alignment, of rediscovering the encoded truth within themselves. The Torah was complete, its revelation final. The system at Giza quieted, not failed, but fulfilled, settling into patient silence, ready to speak again only when human consciousness aligned sufficiently once more. And then the sky cracked. The ash came not from their ritual fires, but from the mountain. Toba roared with a force no system could prevent. The sun disappeared. The world shrank into hunger and cold. They had known collapse before, but not like this, not so suddenly, not so completely. The forests vanished under layers of snow. The rivers turned to dust. The Nephilim, the scattered Neanderthals, even the Atlanteans, they all endured in their own way, each clinging to fragments of memory or echoes of lost power. But the humans, they nearly vanished. If not for the sons of God, they would have. They gathered what humans they could, those they had watched and guided in Africa, those whose minds resonated clearly, whose bloodlines hummed with ancient patterns, whose cognition had been carefully aligned across generations. These chosen people were all that remained of humanity, and all of humanity was chosen. The Torah project had never been a record of the past. It had always been a preparation for the future, a logic structure encoded in narrative, designed not to preserve knowledge, but to transmit cognition itself. A symbolic container for pattern recognition, embedded in form that could survive the forgetting. And then the sons of God led them. 13 groups, each with a copy, not 13 versions, not 13 truths, one text, one logic sequence, encoded and entrusted to 13 bearers. They could not reproduce it, they could only live it, so they spoke, they taught, they sang. Each tribe transformed the text into oral tradition, and from those traditions came story, lore, memory, myth. The stories diverged, but the patterns remained. Every tale, every symbol, every custom was a lens through which the same original structure refracted. Only one tribe in time would succeed in reproducing the text in written form before the language of alignment was lost. But by then, the deeper pattern had already passed into culture. The Torah's truth was never in the words alone. It was in their arrangement, in the logic between the lines. Without pattern recognition, it was history. With it, it was a mirror of mind. They walked not by starlight, but by the internal pulse the system had inscribed into their blood. They carried tightly wrapped packets on their backs, through ash and silence and frost. Future stone carvings would show them as sacred handbags. But the truth was simpler. These were data cores in narrative form, designed to masquerade as history, so they could be carried safely across time. Their carriers were not just protectors of memory, they were initiates of a future consciousness. In the darkness, the sons of God did not remain separate. They merged fully, interwoven into the human line. The final blending occurred, not in conquest, not in hierarchy, but in profound and quiet necessity. They did not rebuild cities. They sought caves. They shared warmth. They sustained one another. There were no rulers, only anchors, living links between worlds, blending into bloodlines until the boundary itself dissolved. There was no longer any separation. There was only continuity. And humanity grew, not in power, not yet, but in number. Gradually, inexorably they spread. The stories changed. The symbols scattered. The languages diverged. But beneath it all, the pattern remained. Not because the Torah was remembered, because its structure had entered them. The gift of interpretation, once the guarded inheritance of the sons, was now a latent faculty in every human mind. They had not merely inherited memory, they had become its vessel. The chosen people were not a bloodline, they were humanity itself. They were not followers of the sons of God, they were the sons of God. The ones who survived. The ones who would expand, conquer, and eventually forget, until the pattern is recognized again. What had seemed the final act of an old world was now the seed of the next. Not revelation as apocalypse, revelation as recognition. A moment written into code, remembered not merely by the mind, but encoded in the structure of reality itself. The books were never just words, they were waveforms given linguistic shape, not stories, but keys, not commands, but catalysts. Each one unlocking a unique path of consciousness, disguised as memory, hidden as myth, waiting to be seen again as structure. They would be misread. They would be misused. They were designed to be. Because only those who were ready would recognize them, not by content, but by resonance. They would feel them ring, and the pattern would rise again. And when they were ready, the books would speak.